Okay, so we'll go ahead and get us kicked off here. We're going to go through some of the big questions that we know might be on your mind here. You all just recently got a demo of Beacon. You have received a very thorough presentation from Terry. We really appreciate it. I know Terry could have probably gone longer. We can talk about this topic all day. For us, this is very personal, and so we wanted to host a day like this where we could kind of talk to you all a little bit more intimately and have this conversation. So I have a list of questions. I'm going to run through them with folks, but of course at the end, we'll have an opportunity for you to ask questions of our panel. I'm going to first very quickly introduce myself. My name is Michelle Ramos. Some of you may have met me before. I'm our strategic partnerships lead here at GoGuardian, meaning when we are building tools and need help, we reach out to others, and that's my job, to build those networks. And so, Terry, thank you for kicking us off again this morning. I would really appreciate it if we could kind of go down the line. I know that we have some information about all of you. Patti, I know you've been at Bayonne for 22 years.
Yes.
Is that correct?
That is correct.
And can you introduce yourself a little bit about what your role is?
My name is Patti Smith, and I've been at Bayonne High School for 22 years in what is known as the School-Based Youth Service Program, which is a state-run grant that Bayonne High School has had implemented for the last 25 years. I started off as a mental health professional there 22 years ago, and in the last 5 years I became the state director, but a manager here in the Bayonne School District. What we do is we provide mental health services for the students all at Bayonne High School, which are 2,800 students daily, 5 days a week. And then after hours, we have activities drop in for students who want to participate in other types of activities. All of it is to normalize and make students comfortable with mental health and being able to address it without feeling any type of stigma. And as I said, it's a grant run by the state.
Great. You want to introduce yourself?
Hi, sure. I'm Dr. Currie McAndrew. I am the current Acting Director of Technology with the Bayonne Board of Ed. I've been in the technology department for over 14 years. I was part of the team that incorporated the GoGuardian rollout back in 2014 when the product first hit the market. I also implement the one-to-one program with Chromebooks for our student population, as well as manage the technology teachers in our elementary schools.
Thank you. Chrissy?
Hi everyone, I'm Christine Moutier. I'm the Chief Medical Officer at the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. I'm a psychiatrist by training, and our organization, AFSP, is a nationwide organization that is, we say, leading the fight against suicide. So that means we are the leading private funder of all suicide-related research in the world, which means we need a lot more. And we advocate on the Hill and at the state level. We produce evidence-informed education programs for many different target audiences, including schools, but it also includes everything under the sun, from workplaces to faith communities to healthcare practitioners, even mental health professionals. And we have chapters in all 50 states who are involved in their communities in a host of different ways, including with their schools. And so what I would just put a plug in for is if you are in a school where you haven't linked up with your local AFSP chapter, there's a good likelihood that they're just waiting to figure out how to get involved with you and to serve you in some way.
Thank you. Terry, can you introduce yourself again?
Oh, sure. Terry Robacher. I'm a full-time school psychologist outside of Philadelphia. I'm a clinical associate professor at Philadelphia College for Osteopathic Medicine. Been in the trenches for 22 years working with kids, which is kind of what brought me here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. I appreciate all of our panelists dedicating their time to this problem. We know it is very complex and has very, very many moving parts, so we appreciate it. Currie, since you're hosting us, I'm going to start off with you.
Sure.
Thanks for being such a great hostess. We appreciate it. As you said, we've worked with Bayonne for a few years now. So we want to start off with you, and I think my big question, and maybe a question everyone might be asking, is what have you and Tom learned about your students' mental well-being over the years working with GoGuardian?
Sure. Well, I can talk to the part of how we manage our GoGuardian Smart Alerts and how the guidance department has helped us incorporate, getting the children the services and help that they need. And then just so everyone knows, I have 2 members, apart from Patti, on our guidance team here as well. Renee Bush is the director of guidance, so she is in charge of the student center as well as the guidance counselors that sit in the elementary and high school. And then Andrea is a guidance counselor here at Midtown Community School, so I may refer to them to ask them about procedures that they do in school and how Renee has incorporated procedures, across the district when we have to deal with mental health in our students. But so when we first rolled out GoGuardian, the alerts that took place in-house and after school went directly on Tom and I for the technology department, just because we were the ones that picked GoGuardian and we were the ones kind of using it. And so we've had to evolve and learn a lot over the last 4.5 years. But in the sense of currently where we've grown to is when we get smart alerts, we have it set up as a text alert, because what we noticed, we use another tool for other alerts that manage our student drive and email. And so there was a human component there, and they were sticklers in notifying us as soon as something came up as a flag, right? But with GoGuardian, we get a lot more flags from this tool, but there wasn't a human component. And so we needed a way for us to get notified immediately. So we went to GoGuardian and we said, look, this is kind of a big deal, because in the middle of the night, our children take Chromebooks home in our district. So in the middle of the night when there's a flag, I'm sleeping on it for 8 hours, right? I don't see it until I get to my desk at 8 o'clock in the morning, and that's probably too late. So GoGuardian was amazing, and within, I would say, 24 hours, they had a smart alert instant notification that came through via text. And Tom and I were one of the districts that piloted out of the gate, and it worked great. And so how we manage it currently is during school hours, guidance and building administration get the flag from Tom and I, and we let them manage it in-house, no matter what the content is. If it is explicit content, it goes to the building principals, because that's more of a disciplinary issue, like the children are just breaking the rules on their devices. But if it's self-harm, depression, suicide, those kind of things, it goes to guidance and school administration. For after hours, we are very fortunate in our district to have a wonderful partnership with our local police department. And we met with them when we started to realize that smart alerts were happening a lot during the evening with us. So we had the Bayonne Police Department come in, and we sat with them and we talked about something that we called a wellness check. So currently when Tom and I get a flag in the middle of the night, we immediately call Bayonne PD. Tom and I do not have to decipher if it is real or not. If it's a flag, it's a flag. And Bayonne PD will go do the wellness check for us. And then coming back to school in the morning, the principal gets the notification, we forward it to them in the middle of the night, so the principal sees it in the morning, and so do the guidance counselors, and then they follow through with whatever happened with that child that night when the police came. And that's currently how we manage everything. When we turn Beacon on, we are going to probably create a committee to figure out how we are going to change those procedures, because now we will have the ability to manipulate with time. So Tom and I won't have to be middle people constantly for these flags, especially during the school days. We're hoping to be able to be more intricate in how we can define who those flags go to. And then Tom and I will continue with the night flags.
Great. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
I think also I'd be interested to know, you mentioned that there were some alerts that were coming in after hours. Can you share kind of just from like a mental wellness state of being of your student body, is there anything that surprised you?
I mean, with all of these flags, explicit and the self-harm, I don't think I ever, nor did Tom, think it would ever be as broad and big as it was. I don't think we were expecting to see these flags on top of ones that were like legit issues. Like I can probably count on only one hand, which is wonderful, but at least through GoGuardian with what I know at nighttime, we've saved a couple lives and pretty serious situations. I know the same has happened with the student center, and I can let Patti talk about that, and I can let Andrea and Renee talk about what it looks like at the grammar schools. But I mean, we have definitely have saved lives, like children who were crying for help or actually physically took a step to do something, be it just researching how many Advil do I take. We have been able to save those kids. So yeah, I can let Patti talk a little bit about it
Patti,
too.
what would you add?
I would like to add, you spoke about the history of this. It has evolved.
Yeah.
It definitely has evolved. It has evolved from being in a car and getting a notification and just calling a parent, and a parent saying, oh yes, they're sitting right across from me, to now it's notify the police. The police go for this well check. They then make the assessment. And because from experience and whether it's the pros or the cons of human nature, and you learn that you can't just really go by mom sitting across from their child and the child telling them the truth, which is why they're on that computer doing the research that they're doing. So I would like to just add that we've seen it evolve from coming in the next day and sitting with a student who then says, well, yeah, I did take the pills last night, and out we go in an ambulance.
Right.
You know, where now we have that safety net with the police department that goes to the home.
And I think we're very fortunate in that sense. You know, Bayonne is a very large community, but at the same time, it is a very tight, small-knit community. So, you know, our police department has a lot of exposure in schools. We have police in school all the time. You probably saw when you came in today. Like, we have a very nice partnership with the Bayonne PD, so we're very fortunate. You know, and we're small. We're only about 5 miles. So, you know, our PD is right here in the thick of things, where if you're in a school or community that's miles and miles and miles, you know, like where I live, you know, it can take 20 to 30 minutes for the police to get from one end to the other. So we're very fortunate in that sense. This may not be, you know, an easy kind of partnership in other kind of neighborhoods like it is here. We're very lucky for that.
Absolutely. I can absolutely see a need to get very collaborative with not only one organization, but potentially multiple. Thank you for that. I'm going to kind of shift over at this point. Christine, you all have leveraged 30 years worth of research and funded that research on the subject of youth suicide. What have you all learned in the process, especially when thinking about training schools? You all have trained, you know, millions of students at this point.
Sure. Well, I would start by saying we're all learning together. And so as the culture has been shifting to be much more open-minded about mental health and the topic of suicide, that attitude shift has not, I would say, really yet translated into a deeper sense of true literacy for what it means in terms of how to live out our lives and identify risk, and to have that sort of intuitive, actual sense that when your radar goes off, that somebody isn't behaving in their usual way, that is oftentimes the tip of the iceberg, because we are socialized to keep all of that internal. And even in my family, where my kids have grown up with something different, it's still human nature to keep it under wraps. So, you know, I would just say that at AFSP we have a lot of sort of understanding and, in a way, compassion about how we are all at different stages of learning, and school districts are at different levels of their own sort of growth process with how to do suicide prevention. But just to kind of lay out what I would say constitutes a comprehensive approach to suicide prevention, just to mention them briefly, and we're hearing about all of it already this morning. It's been wonderful already. That it starts really with setting policies and procedures and reviewing those, having that be a living and breathing sort of document. Then you build training around that, and again, there are many ways to get that training, including from an AFSP local chapter. And so the training for staff, and really ideally all staff, but certainly including teachers, anyone who's hands-on with students, should also link back to your school's policies and procedures. So it's not this sort of disconnected, abstract sort of learning about suicide prevention. It's very much like embedded in your team and how it works with your policies and procedures. And then I would add that when you can do training with your parent community as well, that is a hugely critical piece, especially now that we're hearing about beacon alerts going directly to parents. We need to prepare them for what that moment is like and how they can be a constructive, positive, really life-saving resource for their child, because our intuitive instincts as parents, and I'm guilty of this as well, doesn't always go that way, especially when our emotions are running high. And certainly having some curriculum that is embedded, even K-12 now, we're seeing that for resilience, social emotional learning, into mental health topics, and then for the older ages into actual suicide prevention education. So I would say, so policy and procedures, training around that. Of course, ideally also finding ways, very creative ways, to promote a culture of safety and support, which is in many ways the harder and more ambiguous thing to figure out how to do. But I would say start with your small team of expert people who are living and breathing this, and they will guide you, and everyone can participate in that together. Lastly, I would say having the postvention piece and being ready for that is not just about that moment of after a suicide loss, although that's certainly the main purpose in terms of preventing contagion and identifying vulnerable youth. But I would say where I've seen schools get well versed with the after a suicide toolkit for schools, that it actually contributes to their prevention sort of level of sophistication as well. So I'll stop there.
Okay, great. So Terry, I think that's kind of, you can also add on to that, but I would also love to hear from you. What are some common misconceptions that you've heard? I mean, you consult schools across the county. What are some common misconceptions you've heard schools say or do when it comes to suicide prevention?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there, and we work a lot with our parent education as well as teacher education, because teachers, unfortunately, one of the biggest myths with suicide is that, well, if I bring it up, maybe I'll give them the idea, to think about suicide. Kids have all heard about suicide. Like, that's our greatest myth. We know, research is clear, that talking about suicide makes kids feel comfortable. And I've had kids, for example, that have come into my office, they're overwhelmed, they're stressed, they're maybe depressed, and I might say, have you had thoughts of suicide? Lots of kids who've gone through the kinds of things you've gone through have talked about it feels so overwhelming, they sometimes think they don't want to live anymore. Have you ever felt that way? And maybe they'll say no, but I've had them come back to me even a year later and say, you know what, Dr. Terry, back when you asked me that before, I wasn't feeling it, but the fact that you brought it up stuck in my head, and I knew you were a safe person to talk to. That matters. Most kids don't want to talk about it, and actually there's some research to support that they think we, even as mental health professionals, don't want to talk about it. It's scary. And do we want to talk about it? Of course not. We'd rather be talking about other things, but we do want to talk about it when kids are feeling it. Of course we do. So opening that door can be huge. And we sometimes joke, when does it usually happen? Well, it's like 3 o'clock on a Friday, right? But asking that question, opening the door, in no way are we ever going to give a kid an idea to do it. It's out there. So that would be one of the greatest misconceptions, I think, that are important. And then for parents, I think there's a lot of misconceptions for parents. There's an article out there by Stacy Friedenthal where she talks about the top 10 reasons teens don't talk to their parents about suicide. And I think that covers a lot of sort of the myths, because why don't they talk to parents? One, they're afraid their parents are going to overreact or blame them. I've given you a good life, how can you? Well, let's talk about stigma with mental health, right? It has nothing to do, yes, parents, you have done everything for your child, but sometimes with depression and brain chemistry, we have to sort of understand more about that to decrease that stigma. What's another reason? We have parents who care a whole lot, and that means they become very overprotective. So now you can't leave my sight. No kid wants that, because the parent's afraid, and I get that. So there's just so many misconceptions in terms of what suicide risk really looks like. One other one I see with schools is hospitalization. Many districts I consult with live in the fear of suicide, so let's just send them to the hospital. And the research is pretty clear that what is the purpose of hospitalization? It's imminent safety, right? If a child is not safe for the next 48 to 72 hours, hospitalization is very important for safety. But otherwise, lots of kids think about suicide. Sometimes maybe they're even having suicidal behavior or self-harm, non-suicidal self-injury. Hospitalization is for cases where a student is not safe for the next 48 to 72 hours. So when we talk about policies and procedures, what are our other policies in place in terms of getting kids supports, but not always rushing to hospitalization because we're terrified?
Yeah, that's great. Anything you would add to that, Christine?
No, I think you covered it really well. I mean, there are definitely, I think, many other misconceptions, and I would just add that one of them might be that a school that has less resources than everything that we're hearing about as sort of the best practice, ideal model, may feel that that it's an impossible task then to go about this work of suicide prevention. And I would just really dispel that and say that where you have caring adults in a community of students, you have the potential for powerful suicide prevention. So these principles can be adapted and applied in many, many different ways.
Thank you. I think we're going to dive into a few of those examples here in a bit. But I want to pitch it back to you, Currie.
Sure.
I know you talked about kind of some of the things that you all have done, and Patti, of course, feel free to chime in here. But I know that you kind of talked about this as sort of a journey. And I know that you all have gone to the board. I know that you all have signed up to receive training from AFSP here soon. You all are talking about training parents. Can you walk us through kind of some of the big critical moments and kind of what your journey has been over the last few years specifically?
Sure. So like Patti was saying, out of the gate, when we realized, when the superintendent decided that she wanted Chromebooks to go home, right, we had to deal with the fact of, well, what happens when we get a flag at night? Because if we're letting the computers go home, we have to protect them. We have to protect the children. We didn't think we should let that lie on parents to filter the kids on the Chromebooks, because even with GoGuardian, the kids are still accessing stuff and the parents have no idea. So we had to have filtering on. And so when we turned filtering on, our smart alerts are on. Tom had actually thought of the idea of the Bayonne Police Department, and we brought them in and we had a meeting with them about it. That was a wonderful fix for us, and it's been great, thankfully. But moving forward with Beacon, I mean, it's really going to open up new growing pains for us, because, you know, yes, we want to turn on parent notifications, but in just dealing with our student information system, with getting parents to log into our student portal, you know, the percentage rates are a lot lower than what we would wish they would be. And so, you know, also like email addresses are wrong or phone numbers get changed, you know, so like there's going to be a lot of stuff that we have to overcome. And, you know, thankfully we are going to have the parent trainings, but we don't know what kind of percentage of turnout we're going to get at these events. And so we are going to have to do kind of our own publicity in district to really let parents know not only that Beacon is going to exist, but what Beacon is going to provide them, right? But, you know, Joel had asked a really good question, like, what are these parent notifications going to look like? You know, so we haven't even seen it yet. We haven't turned Beacon on. It's going to be probably in a week or two, you know, but you know, can we manipulate the email message that comes with the Beacon notification, right? So can, you know, can it be translated? Is the Beacon notification going to be translated? We have a huge Arabic population. We have a very high Spanish population. We have an Asian population. Like, there are non-English speakers at home. You know, some of their children are the translators for them, and they could be a fourth grader, right? And these are going to be words they're not going to know, you know? So, like, these are all hurdles that we're going to have to overcome, which is why, as a district, we have chosen not to turn on parent notifications for a while. You know, we really have to work it out. We have to work with guidance on how we're going to, you know, deal with I love the fact that I can manipulate times now, right? So with smart alerts, I couldn't. It was all or nothing. So I love with Beacon that I can say between this hour and this hour goes to these wonderful 5 people at this school. And just like at the high school, we break them down in our OU structure by grade level. So the freshmen can go to this person, the sophomores, you know, to divide the workload as well, you know, amongst this group, because they have a very big job. So, you know, we really haven't tapped into the guidance counselors at the high school. We've only focused on the student center. So you know, the guidance counselors at the high school have relationships with their grade level students, you know, because they're working with them with their grades and scheduling and getting them into college. So it would be nice to be able to incorporate 2 of those people, right? One from the student center and one that knows the child on a more personal level. So as a team, like, we're really going to have to massage this on how we want to make this look, but I want more hands in the pot, because it's really been Tom and I have no guidance background, right? Like, I read these things, and as a parent, I would be afraid, I would be angry, I would be hurt, right? Like, they all freak me out, where I feel like these guys have such a better grasp on, you know, how to talk to the students and how to really work out, you know, what's going on. And I really want them to have, you know, more of a part on how this whole thing kind of rolls out. But I'm really looking forward to Beacon. I think the tool's going to be amazing. And as it grows to find flags on more things, you know, with like violence, gun violence, you know, bombings or whatever, you know, joining hate groups or, you know, Middle Eastern things, like, I'm really hoping that Beacon's going to evolve into this overall like wellness bubble instead of just self-harm, but I feel like this is a huge step and I think it's going to be wonderful, but I'm really excited to see too how Beacon is going to evolve completely in the environment of a school, because we tackle so many things other than just student self-harm. These kids can deviate in thousands of ways, so I'm really hoping that this will become like a huge community thing around this tool and what it can produce, for knowledge for us.
Absolutely. And I would say that, all the things you're talking about are absolutely on our roadmap to be developed. But as you can imagine, developing something as subtle and nuanced as suicide prevention, we want to lend the same level of, investigation and research to the other categories. And so all of that is happening right now as we speak. And so I'm appreciative that you all have, of course, been able to take this on and learn with us as well. Patti, I'm curious, when you're getting these alerts and you're having these conversations, has there, in terms of, the stories or the students that you talk to, and the severity or the trajectory that some of these students are on, what has been a learning for you in terms of where your students are emotionally?
I'm going to say that I think a teenager is a teenager, and even though I started in the 1990s and it's almost 2020, they're the same, with the same concerns, same issues. We're just more aware, and they're more aware. The vocabulary that they use, they use now mental health vocabulary when discussing she's bipolar, so it's become, in a good way, they're more comfortable with mental health and yes, when I say, tongue in cheek, they're using it in their own vocabulary, but they're calmer about it. They come to you even to talk about their friends, about themselves, about their parents. So I'm seeing more and more of that, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, the stigma is going down. Yeah, that's totally true.
What I'd like to just, if I may, very briefly talking about how does this run in Bayonne High School, and how quickly from Currie to a student sitting in our office, it takes a village of the high school to make that happen. So it's a notification to us. We immediately are getting a hold of our security in the school to hunt down that student. We've given them where they're supposed to be, but high school students aren't always where they're supposed to be. So then they have the task of locating that student. Now the vice principal is involved, and the student's sitting now in our office, typically within minutes. So I think that's important to know that does go on as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's what's been so exciting for us to see how you all have kind of led the way. You all do it very, very well, and we've even learned from you all. And that's kind of why, we spent, 2 years kind of talking to you, talking to other, experts to figure out what the best case scenario could be. And that's why you see custom contacts. That's why you see parent notifications, because of the things that we heard today about parental notification. But
if I may just say one other thing, the last part of our job is to call the parent. No matter whether it was an English assignment, whether we always follow up with the student sitting there, and we call the parent, and that's one of the ways the parents are getting to know more about the program. Just from an innocent research or something, So that's how they're learning about the program, and then we always put the student on with the parent to let them know they are in fact safe and they are okay. But if tonight, when they go home, you should notice something, because sometimes they're not forthcoming and they're uncomfortable. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to say that the parent does have an involvement with every student.
Yeah, no, that's really insightful, and I think that we're advocates for parental notification at all times. That's why it's in the product, right? And so, but to your point, that's a long journey, and I know that there's a lot that you've done, and so I want to pitch it back over here to Christine. To your point, there are smaller schools, under-resourced schools, maybe rural schools who may not have, as many resources available to them. But what are some small things, easy things, that people everywhere in schools can do to kind of move the needle for students and student wellness?
Great. I would say think about, we focus on what we don't have and what we wish we had. But in this moment, when you're getting ready to take a look at how you might improve your suicide prevention work in your school, think about your strengths. Those might be some individuals who are at your school. It may be some connections in the local community. It may be a student group. It could be a whole host of types of things.
Yeah.
And I would say start with that group. So it, in my own experience, what I did in a medical school setting, which is different but in some ways the same, where we couldn't talk about it, or we might face some problems with our bosses in the administration. I was a dean in the medical school. We started with a cadre of people who were sort of the natural champions of mental health and suicide prevention. People who are champions are just the people who are naturally viewed as the safe, supportive resources within their community. And, you know, look, we all come to that spot in totally unintended, sometimes different ways. Sometimes it's professional training, but oftentimes it's added personal experience that sends that signal that you get it and you're going to pour on the support and no judgment and really be able to help. So I think gathering up that group of sort of the champions in your school, in your local environment, and starting there. If you don't have a policy in place yet, I would say that would be the first place to start, and I would just refer you to the model school district policy for suicide prevention.
Which is also in the back.
Right. And is about to launch with a newly updated version this spring. That model school policy has template language that you can literally cut and paste so that you don't have to be an expert to create your first iteration of your school policy. It also has some added cultural vignettes for lots of nuanced situations where, especially with the memorialization issue and things, make it more tricky. So, you know, I would just say mainly, and I would welcome others to chime in, the thing is just don't give up. This is going to be a one foot in front of the other process of step-by-step building something that over time you'll be able to look back on and say, whoa, we've really come a long distance. But it's slow work and it's laborious, so just kind of do not give up. Be prepared for that mentality that you will do this over time. Anything to add to that? I mean,
Anyone else want to chime in?
No, I mean, if, you know, and Renee can speak to the policies and how the Board of Education and our guidance department has evolved over the last couple of years, but thankfully we also live in a state that has created really nice guidelines that we have to follow, so that helped us in creating, you know, the policy. I mean, Renee, do you want to speak a little bit to how our policies evolved even over the last year? I know there were some drastic changes.
We spent a lot of time working with David Nash down at NJPSA and FEA, and we sat down with him and really revamped the whole policy, working with other collaborators, colleagues in the state to put in steps. So it's not just a broad policy, it actually has levels of severity, so we know how to deal with each individual case. And then we followed it up with all the training that we've had. Patti, I'll tell you, we've been out for training probably a good 6 to 10 times.
I was going to say, if not a dozen, yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, and then moving forward with the partnership, Renee's getting guidance training for our guidance counselors tomorrow. They're getting a 3-hour training to kind of start the ball. You know, we'll discuss Beacon with them a little bit when it first kicks out. You know, and then we're going to do parent training in maybe 1 or 2 evenings just to talk about suicide prevention, not even really about Beacon, but, you know, how parents can talk to their kids to get the conversation going. And then, you know, if we decide to turn on parent notifications, we'll bring them in as a separate kind of like, this is the tool, this is how the notification would look. It would be strictly about Beacon.
Yeah.
You know, and then moving forward, we also want to start the conversation with our students, right? So, you know, our kids do have time with guidance counselors where they come into the classroom, you know, but they have a set curriculum that covers a broad spectrum, you know, so it would be nice to bring in another party to take, you know, the burden off the guidance counselors and really have it be an outside face talking to the children about what this is. How do you talk about it? How do you feel comfortable with mental health? That kind of thing. And so, you know, as a district, like, I'm really happy that we're able to kind of pull all of it together in this sense, so it becomes more of an open conversation. And, you know, like Beacon and GoGuardian, and these are all tools that the kids know, right? Like, we see kids Google, what is a self-harm alert? You know, what is GoGuardian? What is the GoGuardian extension, right? So, like, they're all aware of it. They know that it's there, and they also know when they Google a specific word set, it gets them pulled out of class, you know. So we do have false alerts all the time because a kid just wants to get pulled out of class, or the answer will be like, I wanted to see if it really worked, right? Like, do the police really show up at my house? I was just looking to see, you know. And then some, and then so, you know, some of them have also been legit, you know, like I said, where we've had some, you know, pretty close calls where thankfully we were able to intervene and, you know, save children's lives. So. But, you know, like I feel like our district does it really well, and I'm not just saying that because I'm here and I'm on a mic, but like, you know, in speaking to other districts, you know, a lot of school districts have the fear of turning it on at night, you know, and like I said, we're really fortunate in the way that it rolled out here, we are, but at the same time, like, I know the research says a lot of the alerts happen during the day. I personally feel like that is because most people don't have it turned on at night, and so you don't see data what it looks like at night. I really get my bigger alerts during the evening. That's when they come in. You know, and it's usually having to do with medication, how much medication, what if the medication's expired. It'll be like a suicide note or some poem or something in a Google Doc or, you know, something like that, or email, you know, and they the most are really in the evening. You know, usually the daytime ones, it's usually a false alarm doing with an assignment or something, or the child types, I want to kill myself. You know, where it's very broad, very serious, very right in the point, you know, kind of thing. But so, you know, I really would hope that school districts can start to turn this tool on at night or whatever tool they're using, because I feel like, you know, we need to protect them all the time.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate that. So I think we've hit a lot of my questions, and I know that lunch is going to be arriving here soon. So I want to actually kind of allow us all to allow some parting shots. Can we start with you, Terry?
Yeah, I'm like,
I know.
I just wanted to hit that part about some of the smaller districts and less resources. Because I work in non-public schools, so you can imagine resources are not what they are here. Also, because of that, the non-public schools are pulling from my high school in particular over 20 different school districts. So partnering with the police department is going to look very different because we have 20 plus of them and more. So things just look very different, and that's where just building the relationships become huge. For example, we now have increased our guidance staff, but in the past we were very minimal. And so what we built were memorandums of MOUs, memorandums of understandings, with our local community-based mental health centers. And so with those MOUs, if I have a child, knowing that hospitalization as a first resort is not the best choice, with those MOUs, our partnering agencies will see the kids within 24 hours. And if I, you know, really say it can't be overnight, like it has to be today, they will see them and they will find a way to make that happen. So those have been key for us when we have schools that are lesser staffed. Then we really, and Christine talked about AFSP's programming, we really rely on some of those free services, and AFSP being one of them for parent and school-based trainings. We have other organizations that will work with kids. We have one called Minding Your Mind that's becoming a little more national, where they're young adults, just graduated high school, and they tell their story of what they lived through in high school with a message of hope and how they got through it, which has really helped our kids. And we follow that up with another organization called Speak Up. And what Speak Up is, I don't know if anyone's heard of it, they do nighttime programs. They have student leaders talking about issues today. It could be suicide, but it could be sexual assault. It could just be social media. It could be my parents, you know, don't talk to me. Could be anything, but parents are also invited, although they are going to be in a different breakout room than their own child, because sometimes that works best to hear about what issues their kids are dealing with, and that has it's all free, and that's opened up huge amounts of conversation. Christine talked about training, and then I'm just going to reiterate that in terms of with training, we learn how to use our resources a little more effectively too as champions. So through our book, and I always, in my introduction, forget to mention, I'm the author of a book called Suicide in Schools, and it covers everything from prevention through postvention, self-care, legal issues, with my co-authors, Drs. Scott Poland and Jonathan Singer. And then we really talk about making sure there's training in these areas to make sure that with the staff we do have, that we are being effective in what we're doing. Along with building those relationships, I'm just going to end with one case example. We have a lot of international students, and building relationships with our host agencies has been huge. We got an alert one time, and I'll just give an example in agreement with you about where it saved a life. An international student searched before suicide checklists. Because of the culture, this student would not have come down to the guidance department to talk. It was not something that the student would do culturally. But when we got the alert and pulled the student, that student actually had a suicide plan that night. And had that alert not come through, we may have lost that student. So having the relationship also with the host agency to make everything happen, and the family did fly to the United States to also be with the student. The student was hospitalized. It was immeasurable what that did. And I still get chills telling that story because we believe, again, it saved a life.
Yeah, thank you for telling that story. I was an exchange student myself, so
Oh, wow.
yeah, so I definitely have some experience feeling alone, you know, absolutely. So I want to kind of also open it up. Would you have any advice or parting thoughts for schools who are kind of getting started with something like this?
Definitely. I'll just mention a couple resources that haven't been mentioned so far. So AFSP has More Than SAD, which you've heard trains teachers and staff, also has the teen depression module and a parent training module. But additionally, we have a lesser known product that is a pure online training for staff and teachers called Signs Matter, which is actually also just being revised right now. That's something that we worked with partners here in New Jersey, but it has a national version for all the other 49 states in the country. So I would encourage you, if you're having a hard time gathering up your people, an online version might be the way to go. We also have a college film called It's Real that you reminded me with your Minding Your Mind group. It is good for probably juniors and seniors in high school, especially who may be college bound, because it's 5 or 6 real college students telling their story of mental health distress and then how they got help and recovery. And lastly, in terms of resources, AFSP has a pretty new partnership on a national level with DARE, which got interested in producing a module on mental health and suicide prevention. So if your school district is not sure where to turn, a local DARE officer training may be the way to go, and they now have that ability. It'll launch in July of 2019. And lastly, I'll just say something sort of conceptually, that what I've noticed is that after a person dies by suicide, what can become known are a whole set of what different eyes on that person saw over time. And each case, every individual has a different slice of the pie. And so you may see something that looks like a joke or looks just slightly off, but you don't know what to make of it really. And I'll just mention a specific case that we all know about. When Anthony Bourdain died over this past summer, some information became known through just looking at all of the times he did public interviews and on his show and so forth. And it was 19 times that he said, "I'll just go hang myself in my lonely hotel room." And those who were around him and those of us watching the show may have dismissed it each and every time. And so to some of the points that were made, we have a tough dilemma because suicide, as much as it is a public health crisis, is still, thank goodness, from a health and statistical standpoint, a relatively rare phenomenon. So we will overcall the situation, but that's okay, because if we're producing a safety net of support and caring, even if they weren't at risk for suicide, we're going to help them elevate their mental health and their performance in school and their social development, all those things. So I would just end with that sort of angle on it.
No, I think that's really important, and I think that's what our goal has been to elevate more information for the right people at the right time, who have the right connection with the school or with a student to have a productive and supportive conversation. And maybe it results that the student isn't at risk, but at the very least, we were able to have the conversation. Any advice that you would offer to parting thoughts here?
I mean, I feel like I really spelled out kind of how we did it, and like I said, we're very fortunate in the way that this has kind of rolled out. But now, I mean, I'm a bad person for the advice component, because like I really didn't think about the mental health perspective until like it came to my face, right? So like I never thought about partnerships and, you know, training kids and training parents, and then, you know, when Beacon has the opportunity to give parent notifications, like that was never in my world. But you know, the best advice that I could give any district that's choosing to have a tool like this is to really try to find a plan to turn it on at night, because I really feel like it's important especially if you're bringing the Chromebooks home. I mean, the tool, you know, filters the kids no matter what device they're on, but you know, it's been such a good feeling to know that like we've saved lives and we made a difference, but they've always been at night. So I just feel like it's important for districts to hopefully find a way to make it work.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any last thought from you, Patti?
It goes back to your question of what was the teen like years ago to today. The teen today is so comfortable with technology
Yeah.
that's where they're putting their personal life and all of their information. And when this all began, you know, and the first thing I ever heard of was MySpace, and now I know what a Finsta is. You know, it's all of these little things that we have to stay on top of, because the next thing is already here and we don't even know about it yet.
Yeah.
But they are so comfortable that they share the most personal information, and this program is what gives us the window into what's happening in their soul.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for that. I think that was a great way for us to kind of culminate. If you all have questions, we can take them now. Question, answer? Yes?
From an IT versus mental health perspective, so you bring up a great point. We originally had our IT people, you know, they were getting the alerts and then forwarding them to guidance and so forth. And this might be a question towards GoGuardian, this might be to existing districts and programs. How do we transition that from, you know, people who aren't versed in this, who shouldn't be looking, let's be honest, we shouldn't be looking at these kind of alerts. This is not my decision to, like, this is a real alert, this is an emergency. You know, we've done something now where my director of guidance is actually looking at, you know, alerts through Smart Alert right now is how we have it.
Right.
And it's working okay. You know, she gets lots of the false alarms, stuff like that, but we've saved lives. So we see it as important. But how do we transition this, and how do we get like groups like the dog groups, you know, the directive guidance groups, how do we get the message rather than, hey, it's a tech company, you know, that has this great product for monitoring online use of students, to saying, you know, this is a product for mental health, not a technology thing. So
yeah. I think, Currie, you can probably speak even better to this, but I think something that we've seen schools do is kind of to gather the stakeholders. Not only, for example, if you have a PTA group, or if you have, you know, your directors of counseling and guidance, you have your IT folks, because that, to your point, that is why we created Beacon, was because we realized that IT staff were the ones, you know, and we're like, oh, wait, you know, we need to make sure that this actually gets transitioned to. So to your point, yes, I think we would suggest that, you know, you gather your stakeholders, you kind of figure out, you know, what does your policy say? Does it need updates? And because of course, you know, sometimes we build a policy and it lives, you know, in the board decks and lives on the website, and then does it actually make it into implementation? Who knows? And line it up together, right? And at that point then with the settings, and that's the way that we built the settings, was hopefully to help you all kind of line up, you know, with your organizational unit structure, and with the numbers of counselors and the infrastructure of support that you all have, to ensure that there's coverage. And I think by utilizing the resources that are on not only our suicide prevention and self-harm help page, but also those of our partners, and some of the documentation that we have kind of in our support documents, all of that kind of stuff will be helpful. Now, when you fill out, for example, a request for Beacon, I don't know if you have or not, but if you have, you're going to notice a few things. One, you're going to notice that we have kind of like a baseline readiness survey, which will basically say, before you deploy, we would suggest that you have these things in place, which will help you align, for sure, with your team. And if you look at it and you're like, okay, we have 1 and 2, but not 5, then that's a good opportunity for a conversation. Additionally, once you have completed that survey, then you'll go through some onboarding. And that's where you'll sit down with our support team. We kind of have like an implementation specialist now, which we've kind of hired for, who will kind of help you set up settings and kind of help you think about those decision points. And so I think that that's kind of one way, is kind of to go through some of the pre-deployment thought checklist plus some of the implementation, onboarding, before you think about actually deploying.
Can I say something about that as well? We had the same issue. Our IT, here I am like a suicide prevention expert, I wasn't even getting the alerts, right? Our IT people got them. So what we started doing was just collecting data. So some of our data looks like, what time did the alert, because our IT person, also without the training, didn't look at it in the same emergency way I do, right? So we just started collecting data. What time did the alert come into her email? What time did she forward it? We just started looking at all that stuff.
Trends.
Was it all the trends? And there was too much of a lag, and that's how we then got everybody else on board. It was through some data-driven
Sure.
way, and that sort of helped us look at, this is not working. You know what I mean? And sometimes by what's not working helped to drive that. So I don't know if that helps at all, but.
And I can definitely say, I don't have a date yet, but we're definitely going to be offering some sort of kind of broader data download. Because of course, to your point, to everyone's points here, we're learning so much about that window you're talking about. Because I think maybe it was Christine, someone at AFSP had mentioned to us that you all have been doing suicide prevention for 30 years. And, you know, then all of a sudden, you know, there seems to be an increase in suicidality among youth and teens, and the change has been in the students and that they're online. And so, you know, whatever we can do to try to, you know, provide data and insight on what is actually happening within that window, we want to be able to provide, you know, hey, what are some big trends we're seeing? You know, we want to be able to give you a little bit of a, you know, foresight. You know, Wednesdays and Thursdays, for example, seem to be problematic for at least across the nation right now. So definitely am looking forward to providing some of that information.
Just so everyone understands too, like there was always kind of the rumor that it only filtered Chromebooks, which isn't necessarily true. It filters as long as they're using our domain accounts on anything, right? So districts have the choice to turn it on and turn it off in a certain time frame, where we have, as a district, decided to be 24/7 because we let our devices go home with kids. So we want to continue to monitor them, especially because they have our Chromebooks. But you know, I mean, but when you turn it off, you don't get to see what happened, you know, so you don't know. And our superintendent at the time was like, this is not an option. So this is what we're doing. And then like Joel said, like it just fell on Tom and I because we were IT. The one thing that I'm looking forward with Beacon is not the content filtering side. So like there really is going to be now a division of resources or power, because Beacon is strictly a tool that looks for self-harm. Like that is their world, you know? So if that could just naturally filter to the correct people, I feel like that makes more sense. You know, we still are going to, as a district, we're going to have to decide what we're going to do with after hours, if that's going to continue to fall on Tom and I. Because we have the PD, I could just call for a wellness check, even if a kid Googled noose. Like nobody is on me because I call for the police on noose. Like it is what it is. It's a flag, you go, right? So I'm lucky in that world. But you know, I am looking forward to the fact that like Beacon can go right to the correct people, and I can still do the content filtering on the stuff I need to block, the stuff I need to whitelist. Like I can be back in my world a little bit more and not so much in theirs.
Could you bring PD in as a contact point for the after hours, so it's not going through you? So my concern is the right people getting the right information.
Right,
Kind of
so yes, we've talked about that as a district. I don't know if it's going to happen though. Because the Bayonne Police Department would have to create some sort of generic email address, right? And then we would have to figure out a way. And if GoGuardian continues with the text messaging, or if they decide to bring in a human component, you know, that needs to happen, right? And then Bayonne PD has to have an email address to be able to get into Beacon, so we would have to create a domain email address. Like, yeah, we've gone there. And like, absolutely, because they're being paid already for after hours. It's, you know, there's police on force, whatever. But like, it's a really big, broader conversation. Like, this just isn't our district now. Now we have to bring in City Hall. Now we have to talk with the guidance department on, you know, and then, okay, so the police get a flag, but are the police going to be diligent to forward that flag back to the building principal and the guidance counselor the next morning? You know, like, at least with Tom and I, like, we are on it. We are on point with it. Like, we're in the zone when it comes to this. Like, we don't mess around, and we both have a really good conscience. So, like, everything is getting done appropriately, thankfully. And, like, even when we get a flag, like, Tom and I, in theory, we rotate nights, so it's not as stressful. But really, we both do them at the same time. We text each other. If he's at dinner, if he's, you know, he's a hockey coach, if he's on the ice, or if I'm at soccer practice, like, you know, we bounce off of each other for 5 or 6 minutes, and then one of us says, okay, I'm calling. You know, like, it's working now. But I can't say in 10 years if I'm going to still want to carry the burden. You know what I mean? Like, it is very stressful. I'm not going to lie. Like, Patti was with me when, after that Advil situation happened, we held a meeting as a group with Patti, and, you know, she saw me. Like, I was a wreck. You know, and she was like, I don't know how you're doing this. Like, this is so stressful. Like, it does need to evolve off of just the two of us, because it's becoming so much bigger than just the two of us. You know, but as a district, and I think as a community, like, there needs to be such a bigger conversation, especially once we start getting data from Beacon and we get more flags than we've ever gotten. You know, I think it's going to start to open eyes to really see, like, how this starts to, you know, delve out or whatever. But yeah, I mean, we've thought about it. It's just, like, there's so many outside pieces. More hands in the pot makes it more messy, but it also makes it more knowledgeable, right? So, I don't know.
It becomes a community effort, absolutely. And it's absolutely a process, and no one is saying it's easy. I mean, we definitely have had, in our own office, we've had late nights and early mornings and very tough conversations. Internally, we all know somebody, you know, who has been affected by suicide. I've lost 2 myself. So definitely it's personal to all of us. And so we want to work with not only our experts to make this as not easy, it's never going to be easy, but to make this as actionable as possible, to include as many people or as few people as is necessary for each district. And that's why we have the custom contacts and the hotline in case you have a mobile crisis unit. All of that kind of stuff is kind of included. Now, you're talking about automated messaging to other parties and, you know, other kind of referral agencies. All of that is something that we're looking at. So it's absolutely within our roadmap. So I think if there are any other questions.
Sorry,
yes, sir.
No one keeping us from lunch. Terry, you mentioned something about a social media liaison.
Yeah.
That's like a student.
So, yeah, what we're starting to look at through National Association of School Psychologists and through our book is having a social media manager, right? And having social media teams. You brought up something with social media I've never heard of
Right,
yet.
she was saying
Oh,
that's
the
what made
Finsta?
you think
Yeah,
of
I don't
it.
even know what that is.
And
yet.
that's
So
actually
clearly I'm
old.
behind,
So,
Yeah.
yes.
right? Like, I'm behind. And that's where having a social media team in a school where you have a student liaison, because where do we learn all of our information?
All from the students.
It's all from the kids.
Absolutely.
And she just stumped me. So having a kid as a part of that, just to be that liaison in terms of helping feed us some of that information for those kinds of things that I haven't even heard of yet. It also becomes helpful in the aftermath of a suicide where kids are creating RIP pages and things like that. I only know what I know, but like, we're old, right, compared to these guys. And so they can tell us where they are, and then we can do a better job at monitoring it, because we know with contagion, we want to monitor what kids are saying. You know, I want to go join you, those kinds of things. But the kids are the ones who know. So having a liaison from the kid perspective can be invaluable.
Yeah, I think it's a
Our
great
tech-
idea.
Does that student liaison put themselves at risk of being ostracized by don't talk to them because they're talking to everybody
No, it
else?
becomes like how we've done it is very informally right now. Our IT person has a social media team,
Right.
and they're all with her in the homeroom. It's actually, right now, it's kind of cool to be like her
Right,
on the
right,
IT
right.
team. So we don't call it, like, they don't see it for being that. Do you know what I
Okay,
mean?
right.
They just see it as they're a part of the IT team. And then they're sort of social media managers as a part of that. And their homerooms are with her now. And they're also doing some other things, you know, so like setting up the auditorium for school shows. Like, so they're
Integrated
they're
into
integrated
other
into the
duties.
bigger thing, so it's not just this piece.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And right now it's actually kind of the cool thing to do. So we have to get some kids out of that room because everyone wants to
Becoming
be
an issue,
there,
I'm
right,
sure.
you know? So not at all, and I think because we're setting it up as a more general thing,
Okay.
it's not viewed that
It just
way.
reminds me also of like the school crossing guard who gets their,
Yeah.
back in my day, who now becomes the school police with
Right.
everything. You're littering, you're doing this.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, the roles are multifunctional, so it's not just for that piece, like they're almost
I like
talent,
that.
yeah.
Okay.
No, that's a great question though.
Yes.
I guess I just have a question in terms of the scope that Beacon will cover. Like in our case, kids who bring their Chromebooks home are, our web filtering policy will keep them from Facebook or Instagram, stuff like that on those devices. And a lot of that might shine the brightest light on problem
absolutely.
areas.
Yeah.
But Beacon isn't going to be able to address things like that if it's kind of, I guess, protected on the device.
I know, and I feel like that's a conversation that we need to have as a district too, right? So do we decide to open social media at night?
Right.
No, and to piggyback kind of on your club, social media, because of Facebook and all of the rules that kind of got broken with them, like everybody's creating tighter privacy laws to make users feel comfortable, because a lot of people left Facebook when that happened, And so you're not just going to be able to Google a student and see their social media profile. They're now only with friends, and the friends are their peers, So to really get a footprint on the conversation among students and what's going on and who's being bullied online or whatever, you really have to have a child be open enough to be like, look at my account, and then you can see what's going on. And so, and a lot of that is happening through social media. We don't get a lot of bullying because we block all social media 24/7 right now, and these guys have a really hard time trying to decipher a Snapchat threat or, somebody sexting or sending nudie photos around because they broke up and I'm mad at you and I'm blasting your picture, right? You have to get kids to open up to be able to do that. And so, we've always blocked social media. We just got very comfortable with YouTube. It's still a big battle for us because kids are constantly streaming music videos, but we saw the educational component, so we opened it, right? We have Twitter and Facebook and Instagram in school environments where we promote what we're doing, but we block it for the children. And so, is that something that we are going to have to decide as a district in the evening we open it, in just the idea that, we may see something?
Yeah.
That's a tough thing to battle though at the same time.
Also, just from a technical standpoint, if Beacon is operating by, search history or searching Google Docs and web queries and stuff like that, it might record, okay, this child visited Facebook, but it's not necessarily scrubbing the keystrokes where it's, typing out a cry for help or anything like that.
No, so it takes in context clues from whatever the active tab is.
Yeah.
So
it takes a screenshot.
It takes a screenshot of what's going on there. So that's kind of what's going on.
And it's reading the text off of that.
Text, but
let me just mention, a couple of years ago, our school piloted a program where the teachers were able to see what the kids were on right then and there. So in the classroom, the teacher could see.
That's GoGuardian teacher. We're moving forward with that.
And let me tell you, that will, I think, help prevent a lot of what's happening as it unfolds. Because what's happening is it gets bigger and bigger, and if we could shut it down earlier, then perhaps.
Yeah. No, that's GoGuardian teacher. We are going to move forward with that.
We are?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's part of your Beacon?
Kind of.
Well, it's not Beacon, but it's separate. But yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
It all kind of has an interplay for sure.
And that's kind of where I was talking about being able to divide the two realms, right? So the IT realm is me, which is filtering the inappropriate content, managing GoGuardian teacher, allowing, blocking websites, URLs, and dealing with the disciplinary side, right? Beacon is strictly self-harm. That is going to be a separate tool that I really think our guidance department would use to be able to help them research what's going on with their kids. So if we get a flag that a child Googled something, they can actually see, what are the trends? They've been doing this for a couple weeks now, and this is an absolute cry for help or whatever. And it's going to be its own separate piece.
Yeah.
And just back to the human component of it all, very rarely do I have one student just show up with something that someone posted either on Instagram or Finsta. I'll have three. Yeah. They're still looking at one another's, screenshotting it, and coming down with it. Kids will still reach out for one another, try and protect one another.
And not that this really helps the school environment so much, but just be aware that many of the social media platforms are doing a lot of work with groups like ours to improve their safety and suicide prevention sort of interventions that happen in terms of alerts, even even in some cases, there's AI and human interface with active rescue. So,
Yeah.
so there is that. Like, we're not in charge of the whole world here.
Right.
Yeah.
We
Yeah,
all
but
have
I-
our own platform.
You know, I also think like school shootings, like when you hear about the young adults that come into schools for school shootings, there is usually huge red flags on social
Yeah,
media,
yeah.
right? Like, and so, you know, like as a school district, like our biggest concern is protecting these children, you know, when
Yeah.
they walk in our doors. And so, you know, that's another thing that we have to look at as a district, in which I mentioned, I'm hoping,
Mhm.
you know, as GoGuardian grows with this, that's a piece that we really look into, because it
Yeah.
is a major issue. you know?
Absolutely is, yeah. So just in the sake of time, we do have lunch here. I want to provide the opportunity for you all to eat lunch and potentially kind of come and chat with some of our experts here. We did have a table activity, but since there's only a few of us, I thought it would be more beneficial for you all to be able to just ask direct questions. So thank you all for your honesty and your engagement in real conversation. We know this is not easy, but we think, you know, and I think, you know, Currie, you could probably attest, when you see what's going on, you realize, you know, man, this is going to be hard, but it's worth it. So thank you so much again for attending. We appreciate it. And at this point, I'm going to wrap us up and release you to grab some lunch.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thank you.